Hello, hello, hello. Good afternoon, Cal Poly Pomona. Hey, who's that in the back? Is that Tavry? Someone's waving at me. I don't know who it is. My eyes are so bad. Okay, you all have to do better than that. Good afternoon, Cal Poly Pomona. Okay, take two. Got to be better than that. Okay, come on now. I know you have more energy than that. Good afternoon, Cal Poly Pomona. That's better. I'm going to go ahead and get started with just an introduction, and then we're going to start with the program. Hopefully that will give people ample time to come in. I heard that there's some confusion about the room, so apologies for that. You know, this is our first big in-person event since the pandemic hit. So it's wonderful to welcome you. I do want to acknowledge that we are on the Tongva land of the indigenous peoples, and depending on where you are from, I would hope that you would take the moment to acknowledge that we are visitors on this land, and I think it's really important for us to start with that land acknowledgement. I am Dr. Mary Kunmi Danico. I'm a professor of sociology, but I have the honor of being the director of the Weglin Endowed Chair for Multicultural Studies. And it's been truly an honor. For those of you who may not have ever heard of Michi or Walter Weglin, Michi was a survivor of the Japanese internment camps. And she wrote a seminal book called Years of Infamy that led to the redress for a lot of Japanese folks who were interned and put into concentration camps. She was also a costume designer for the Perry Como show. So there are a lot of things that they don't know. And I'm currently working with, hopefully, with the Smithsonian to hold on to some of her original artworks that I was gifted. So we're hoping that it's going to be accessible to everyone. And Walter was a survivor of the Holocaust. And he also was a perfume chemist. Really great sense of nose. I should find out what perfumes he actually helped develop, because that'd be kind of cool. And they met in New York. And from there, they fell in love, did a lot of work, but they remained very active in the community. Later, they met our former president, Bob Suzuki, and his wife, Agnes. And their friendship really went off in an area of scholar activism, where they felt it was really important to ensure that histories and herstories are not forgotten, that we don't have cultural amnesia of things that are happening in our world, right, in our communities. And so they established this endowment, Michi and Walter Endowed Chair for Multicultural Studies. But our focus is primarily on social justice, because that's what they really wanted us to do. And so I have the honor of being the director, but I have so many great colleagues here. I don't know if you're all here. Again, my eyes are so bad, even with glasses, so I took them off because it didn't make a difference, who are on the Weglin Advisory Committee. So would you mind standing up if you're here on the Weglin Advisory Committee? I don't know if they're still walking down. Okay, what? Not yet. Okay, maybe they're on their way. I don't know if Melissa is here. Melissa Ortiz is the Weglin intern. Please give her a big round of applause. She is my right hand and left hand person who helped with so much of the invisible labor that you probably don't get to see. So I really want to acknowledge Melissa. Thank you. So with that, I am so excited to launch our first conversation with the legendary icon who has been relevant and continually, with ongoing efforts of social justice, who I met when I was a grad student on the floor at a conference. And I knew at that moment, I thought, oh my gosh, that's Helen Zia. For those of you who may know Helen Zia, at the end, you will all be going, oh my gosh, that's Helen Zia. Helen is one of the most humble, modest people that I know, despite the years, over 40 years of activism. What she has done for our community, and when I say our, I'm not just saying Asian American community, I'm talking about our collective community, words cannot describe what she has done for so many of us. For those of my generation and maybe a generation younger, we learned about our communities, Asian Americans, African American, Latino, queer communities, a lot through her work. She was editor of Ms. Magazine, one of the first women of color. She is an author of 3 books. 3, right, Helen? 3 books. And the most recent one, Last Boat Out of Shanghai, incredible biography of like epic story of the Chinese who fled Mao Revolution. She did come and do a talk with Angry Asian Man and Jeff Yang for a podcast on They Call Us Bruce a while ago. I have this copy to give away to, I don't know, Melissa, you decide how we're going to give this away. And she will autograph it for you. But the thing that with Helen is that why we brought her here today is this is the 40-year anniversary of the Vincent Chin murder. How many of you have heard of Vincent Chin? Okay, a few people, okay. And I'm not surprised because a lot of times our history books and our academics, K through 12 in college, we don't learn about our histories. And this is our collective history. So Vincent Chin was murdered after a bachelor party. And we're going to talk a little bit about that, so I'm not going to spill the whole thing. But it's been 40 years since his murder. And we also recognize that there has been a peak of anti-Asian hate, right? And who could I think of to kind of talk about the original anti-Asian hate that really galvanized our communities to take action? It was the Vincent Chin's case, and it's Helen at the forefront. Renee Tajima Pena from UCLA made a documentary that was Oscar nominated called Who Killed Vincent Chin? So I encourage you to watch that, right? But we're going to talk a little bit more about that. And then finally, we also are going to talk about how do we build solidarity? How do we build coalition, right? So then when I invited Helen and she graciously accepted, I was like, yay, she's coming. I thought, okay, who can I have to be kind of the interlocutor, right? Like the person who's going to have a conversation with Helen. So who did I think of? Dr. Anthony Ocampo. Woohoo! Come on. So Dr. Ocampo has a book out. I don't know if any of you are subscribed to LA Times or seen the LA Times, but it's been reviewed by LA Times just recently, is Brown and Gay in LA. But he also wrote the book on why Asian Americans are the Latinos of Asia, right? Or Filipinos are the Latinos of Asia. Prolific writer, a great public sociologist, and a wonderful conversationalist. So I asked him to come join us to have a conversation. So that's what we're going to do today. But before that, I want to properly introduce Helen Zia, who's going to give us some few words before we engage in conversation. Thank you, Helen, for being here.
Is this working?
Yes.
It is? Okay, cool. Okay, I'm going to do this again. Hey, everybody, good afternoon. Okay, all right, okay, I won't make you do it again like Professor Denico did, but I just want to say what an honor it is to be here. I know some of you saw the film, I guess was shown here not long ago, Who Killed Vincent Chin. That film is almost 35 years old. And this was something we produced for the Detroit commemoration. This is 40 years ago. And when Vincent Chin was killed, I was around your age. I was in my 20s. And so 40 years later, I'm still here. But I remember back then thinking like, 40 years ago, man, that is like the dinosaur era. And so why do we even remember these things? What is the point of remembering history and something about a hate crime that took place 40 years ago? Well, as you all know, that during this pandemic, there have been, this dual pandemics of COVID and racism. Anti-Asian hate has just gone off the charts, but so has hate toward pretty much every marginalized group. And so, the homophobic, transphobic, anti-Black, anti-Latinx, violence against women, they've all just been, all over the place. And so the point of remembering a hate crime from the past is not so much the crime itself, even though there's a lot to learn from that. It's about what people did about that. And so that's what this talk I hope to share today is about. Those of you who don't know who Vincent Chin is, he was a 27-year-old Chinese American who was about to be married. He was going out on the night of his bachelor party to a really sleazy strip bar with some friends of his. And it was also a time of incredible anti-Asian hate. So, when a lot of the, back in 2020, even end of 2019, these incidents started popping up on your social media where people were going like, I can't believe this happened. Somebody attacked my child. Somebody pushed my grandfather. This happened to me when we were going for a walk. Somebody threw acid on me when I was taking the garbage out in my neighborhood. And often what would accompany those social media posts were, I can't believe this could happen. Nothing like this ever happened to me before. How could this be happening today? And what started coming out in the course of this, past 2.5 some years was people were like, no, this has happened before. Not only has it happened before, but it's been part of the DNA, the systemic racism that has happened to Asian Americans and to other communities as well. Any immigrant, refugee, a migrant community has faced all kinds of hatred. And so what happened to Vincent Chin in 1982 actually has a lot of parallels with what's happening to Asian Americans and other marginalized communities today. It's about being scapegoated. It's about being blamed. It's that last White House and so many leaders even today that just can't resist saying, and we are blaming all those Chinese people. Well, what we've learned now in these past 2.5 years is that one website, just one website in the whole country has been collecting, some of you may know, people can report incidents, self-report to stopaaPIhate.org. In the last 2 years, they've collected more than 11,500 reports. So that's a lot of data, and that's just a one website. And I have to say, most people who experience hate violence the first thing they do is not to report it to a website, right? But, so we know that 11,500 is a way undercount. But what we're finding is they ask, what is your ethnicity? What is your race? And it's all over the map. It's anybody not only who looks Chinese, and so that's East Asian, but it also includes people who are South Asian, brown Asian Americans. It also includes Latinx people. There was a man in Oakland, California, where I live, who happened to be in Chinatown, and he was attacked and he was killed. Why? Because they thought he might be Asian. And so the whole point about hate crimes is they're not restricted to any particular group. People who are so angry that they're moved to violence, it doesn't just stop there to one particular group. But anyway, the whole history of scapegoating and hating and blaming other people for whatever, inflation, the price at the gas pump, that was going on in 1982 and 1983 as well. And so actually back then, now if you read the reports about gas prices, inflation, back then the average price of a gallon of gas was probably less than 50 cents a gallon. It went up to more than $4 a gallon. That would be as though today, if you think of $3 as the price before, going up to $50 a gallon today. And inflation back then, we talk about today being 8%, and it's the worst since 40 years ago. 40 years ago, inflation was more than, it was 18, 19, 20%. And so I'm only telling you this to say what we're going through today, what you're experiencing today, the anxieties of all this stuff happening today. The thing about remembering and understanding the past and history is to know that our communities, young people going to college have gone through this before. And the plus is to know that if you look at these things, you see how people come out of it. and what we learned from that, and what we can learn from that so we don't repeat all the mistakes of the past too. But so the thing that happened in that terrible hate crime, when Vincent Chin was out for his bachelor party, and the entire, well, you know, Detroit is Motown, right? It's the Motor City. Cars are what everybody works in. I was laid off. I was an auto worker myself. I worked in a Chrysler stamping plant for a few years, but then the bottom fell out and everybody lost their jobs. I had 2 years seniority. People who had 30 years seniority lost their jobs. And these were really well-paying jobs. These were union jobs that, you know, if minimum wage back then was $2 an hour, which is probably higher than it really was, at an United Auto Workers plant, you got $10 an hour, and every insurance and pension benefit you can imagine. You know, think of $2 an hour going to $10 an hour. That would be like today getting what, 50 or 60 bucks an hour. What a difference that made in my life to have, you know, a solid job like that. And I got laid off. Everybody in the city was laid off. There were no jobs to be had. And so people were, and it went on. That period of economic recession began in 1978. Vincent Chin was killed 4 years later in 1982. And so people had been out of work for 4 years already, not knowing that they would ever have a job that could get them a second home, 2 or 3 cars, an RV, a summer cottage, and they lost everything. And not only that, they lost their futures for their kids. They wanted those jobs for their kids, not just for themselves. And so anyway, people were angry, they were frustrated. In the same way today, people are angry and frustrated. You know, we all know people who have been sick and unfortunately who have passed away during this time. Jobs being exposed to, you know, everything, and who's an essential worker, whose lives are expendable, all of those things that have come up today in these past couple years. Well, just to say that we can learn from previous times where that level of frustration was true too. Now, Detroit was even then a mostly black city, and the 2 auto workers who saw Vincent Chin at that sleazy bar where he was celebrating his bachelor party, 2 white auto workers who are not unemployed saw him, and pardon my language, but they said, "It's because of you motherfuckers that we're out of work." Now, they weren't out of work. They were talking about, you know, and so Vincent Chin was not the kind of guy who would just let people call him every kind of name. It was his bachelor party. And he got up and said, "Don't call me that." And so they had a fight in the bar. They were thrown out of the bar, and it might have ended right then, except then the 2 assailants went to their car and pulled out a baseball bat. And Vincent said, "I'll fight you, but not with a bat." And then he started running through the streets of Detroit. They followed him. And here's the thing, Vincent was with 4 friends. 2 were white, and then there was Vincent and his other Chinese buddy. And so the two killers were chasing after only Vincent and his Chinese friend. They went in front of a busy McDonald's. They were waiting on the main drag of, you know, the main street of Detroit, waiting for a bus to come by because they got separated from their friends. And the 2 killers spotted them. They were driving around stalking, and they saw them, crept up behind them. Vincent got up to run. He slipped. The one guy, the stepson, grabbed him in a bear hug, and the stepfather, with the bat, started swinging at Vincent in front of about 70 eyewitnesses who said he was going for a home run. And he smashed into Vincent's head like he was going for a home run. And now, that would have been a tragedy. I mean, it was a tragedy. And so there was a newspaper article, you know, bridegroom's guests go to his funeral instead, tragedy. But they didn't say anything about race. They didn't say anything about, for 4 years, Detroit had been in the midst of a, like today, a lot of hate and hateful words, hate incidents going on all over the place. If you drove a Japanese-made car, you could get shot at on the freeway, whether you were Asian or not. And so that was the kind of atmosphere. And so when it finally made its way through the court system, the judge at the sentencing, and there was no question that they had done it, they pled no contest, because it was witnessed by about 70 people at the McDonald's. The judge sentenced them to probation and about $3,000 worth of fines that could be paid over 3 years, $120 a month, and that was less than the cost of a used car. So that was the price that the judge assessed the value of an Asian American man's life. And so how did he explain that? He said, these two white auto workers who had jobs, who showed up in court in suits, these are not the kind of men you send to jail. These are not the kind of men you send to jail in a city like Detroit, where who do you send to jail then? In a city that's mostly black. And so anyway, there was a big outcry, and the Asian American community at the time was so small and fragmented. So what that meant was, I'm Chinese American. The Chinese American community didn't talk to the Japanese American community, didn't talk to the Korean or Filipino or Indian communities. They knew each other, maybe, but they never stood together for something. And that was the moment where the community came together and said, we have to do something. We have to speak up. And so I just want to say that as introduction to say, and so then we're going to talk about how then the Asian community first came together and then came together with the black community of Detroit, the small Latinx community of that time, that Detroit has the largest Arab American population outside of the Middle East in the world, how the Arab American community came together in support, and Muslim, Christian, Jewish, every faith you can imagine came together. And so the real lesson is not just understanding what creates hate and hate violence and what was done about it back then, which was a lot, a lot took place, but also that communities came together. And it was not, I talked to a lot of, people who say, wow, it's so great that people came together. Does it take something like that to bring people together? And I'm like, no, today you've got lots of things like that or worse today. What it is the hard work to bring people together. There was nothing kumbaya about it at all. People, had to knock on doors, had to go on. I and other of the activists then went on radio stations, black talk radio stations, where people called in and they said, who are you Asian people? Where did you come from? Are you here to just ride on the coattails of the black civil rights movement? And so there were hard questions all the time, or within the Asian community, people saying, if we stand up and we speak up, are we just going to become even bigger targets? Are we going to make things worse for ourselves by speaking up? And, those are questions that people ask today. The real fears, the real conversations that take place. And, if you want to do something about it, you have to answer the questions. And by answering the questions and people talking with each other, talking about their fears, and to say, if we don't speak up, these things will happen even worse. Or well, actually, Asian Americans, some Asian Americans in our very small communities in the 1960s did support the black civil rights movement. They have names, we have pictures. We have pictures of the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King at Selma, Alabama with Hawaiian leis on their necks that Asian Americans brought to the whole front row. Anyway, we can talk about those things and to say, and yes, we have to deal with anti-blackness in the Asian community, and we have to deal with, today, anti-Asianness in other communities too, and to be upfront and recognize these things. So anyway, I'm going to just stop there to say all of this, even though it might seem like it's like dinosaur years ago, It's all very relevant to today. And the thing is that we actually came through that time. And so to remember, as terrifying and oppressive as things might seem today, that actually, you know, in historical times there are cycles. We will come out of this. We came through that as being a terrible time of depression and hate and racism, and tried to elevate things, make things better, lift up our communities. Well, we didn't end hate violence then, clearly, but that's what it's going to take today. And for all of you, there really is, when we organize, when we do things, when we take action together, we amplify it, and we will get out of it a lot sooner and better than we came into it. And so that's my message about why this is important today. So with that, Anthony, I guess. Oh, I guess so. So one of the things we did, sorry, let's see. I don't know if we have to go back into Control-Alt-Delete to unlock. Okay, now we're here. We can all see what the password is.
Just for a second.
Oh, there we go. Thanks. So as Professor Denico said, this is the 40th year. And earlier this year, in June, Vincent Chin was attacked on June 19th, 1982, and he was taken off of life support on June 23rd. And so during that period today in this year in Detroit, we had a big commemoration, a remembrance, but a rededication as well, saying that we all have to take these lessons and continue to stand up and fight for all of our communities today. So one of the things we did, and I want to say that there were students from Cal Poly Pomona who went to support, actually help do research for this guide, and that was one of the reasons I wanted to show it. And Professor Denico and Danielle, what's her last name? Castillo came to Detroit to actually volunteer for this. It was a massive event. And one of the things that has come out of this, and I just want to show you this because if we can get this happening, we put together a definitive legacy guide to say what happened. And I want to show this this is free, available, downloadable online, vincentchin.org/legacy-guide. It's in English. It's also in Chinese, simplified and traditional. And we're getting it translated into Korean, Vietnamese, Bengali, Arabic, and hoping to get it translated into Spanish. And so, so that people can not only see what happened then. And so I'm just going to show you some of this, because why are we having it translated into, all right, you can see I'm not so great at this. We're having it translated because we also, the whole thing about how are we linked together as communities. We have a whole section here about the fight for civil rights. The fight for civil rights is the story of Black and Indigenous Americans, and the history here begins in the 1400s and 1500s. And if I can get to that quickly, I'll try to find that here. Right here, we start in the 1400s and 1500s, and in the side, in a small little balloon, is what was happening with Asian and Pacific Islanders then, because actually there were Asian and Pacific Islanders on North America at that time, recorded. And so there are these. And it's being translated into Chinese, Vietnamese, Korean, and other languages, because so many of our immigrant communities are having problems right now, and not, where there's Black-Asian tension, for example, and not having any idea of what the history of civil rights is in America, or about Black, Latinx history. And so this is going to be in Chinese. We want our immigrant communities to see this too. So this is just a way, and we want to take it into middle and high schools as well as college level. And so that's what I wanted to show you. And also that here is the part where students from Cal Poly Pomona help do research, because the idea that some people on social media say, oh, I didn't know this could happen. Well, actually, have been many, many Asian Americans and Pacific Islanders killed in these ever since, before, but we were tracking here 20 years since Vincent Chin was killed, and we talk about what happened. For example, in Stockton, California, one of the very first school shootings took place, school mass shootings, at an elementary school that was mostly Southeast Asian, Cambodian, Lao, Thai kids. And 5 8-year-old kids were shot to death then. And the first thing that the police said, think about Atlanta, was, oh, this has nothing to do with race, right? It was the same thing that happened. He was having a bad day, and he showed up in his camo and with his semi-automatic weapons and picked this school. And it took a community outcry to find out that, well, okay, he was actually affiliated with different white supremacy organizations. So I just wanted to show this to say there's a lot in here and a lot of questions for discussion. But with that, I'm going to step aside and, and I hope we hear a lot of questions and dialogue from all of you.
Okay, Dr. Ocampo, go ahead and have a seat. Helen, you want to sit right here?
Okay.
All right, so you're going to just kind of be like sitting in on like a living room conversation. So we're just going to ask some questions and have good talks, and then you could be the fly on the walls. And then later on, we invite you to join the conversation. So we're going to go ahead and do this for a little bit, and then I'll open up to the floor.
Thank you, Mary. Thank you, Helen, for sharing that bit of history that a lot of folks just don't know, and I think that's become very clear over these past 2 years since 2020. There was a lot of reaction from news outlets, politicians who felt like what was happening on the streets with anti-Asian hate attacks was a new phenomenon. And I'm wondering, that's just the tip of the iceberg, with like these physical altercations we see, and I'm wondering if you could share a little bit about the other arenas where anti-Asian hate happens, but it's not as explicit as, say, like someone beating up an elderly Asian person on the street. You gave one example with the court system and how they devalued. That's not anti-Asian hate, but it illustrates a devaluing of Asian lives. And so I was wondering if you could speak to other arenas where anti-Asian hate is happening.
So yeah, I mean, when we talk about incidents, violence and killing and assaults, those are the extreme, but there's a lot that goes on before then that every one of us could do something about. But I often hear people say, well, something that bad never happened to me, so I don't want to speak about it, and then other people, they know the word microaggression, right? And they say, well, things get said, and it just doesn't seem important enough to say anything. And I think that's where we all could, because a lot of people think microaggressions mean small, like tiny little aggressions. But actually, it probably would be more accurate to call it micro-racism, in the sense that it is racism or micro-oppression. It could be sexist or homophobic or anti-immigrant or whatever comment. But and you think, well, okay, they didn't know what they were saying. It was just a comment of ignorance or whatever. And what I think people it doesn't get talked about enough, is that the terminology and the construct of microaggression is in the same way of microeconomics and macroeconomics. And any of you study economics or had to take any of those courses? I see some nods. I mean, Microeconomics is the interactional things, going to the store, paying for something, what individuals do. Macro is the infrastructure and the systemic economic structure. And one does not exist without the other. Nobody would say, oh, microeconomics doesn't matter, it's only macro. They go together. You have to take both of them if you're studying economics. And so when we talk about institutional racism, that's the macro racism. That's the institutional and systemic. Then there's the transactional, the individual things that happen on a day-to-day that is also part of the systemic racism. And so, I have experienced many things like that too, where somebody says something, somebody does something, where, somebody walks over me. It's like, what am I, chopped liver? You just thought I wasn't even here? And those things, it's like, what do you say? And the hard thing is, like, what do you say in the moment? And I've come to my 70 years now realizing that, when these things happen, you can actually have something in mind, like, that it doesn't have to be perfect. And I know many of you are students and you think, I don't want to say anything unless I get exactly the right construction together, and by then the moment is over, or you're in a class and you hear something, or you're in a meeting and somebody says something, and you can actually say, just have something in mind like, I just want you to know I didn't think that was cool. Or you can say, something you said didn't sit with me well. I want to think about exactly how to share that with you, but I hope you'll, listen to me, because when I think about that, I'll come back to you, and so I hope you'll be open. But to have something to say, because I have found that for me, the thing that bothers me the most is when I don't say anything. And so I know some of you are here for psychology classes and so forth. It's the thing that's part of the corrosiveness of it. Because I still remember times when it's like, oh, I wish I had said something. Now I can think of 1,000 things to say. And so those of you who saw the film Who Killed Vincent Chin, that was filmed 40 years ago. There's a scene in there where somebody says, aren't you Asians just being naive, thinking that you can do something about the criminal justice system? And I'll tell you, in my head was exploding. The camera is rolling. My head was going, fuck you! How dare you say that? And I thought, okay, I shouldn't say that. And then I went home and I thought about it, and I thought, oh, I could have said this. You're a lawyer. How could you say that I'm naive? What gives you the right to defend white supremacy and say that people of color are naive? And anyway, all those things, just to say that 40 years later, this still eats at me. And so this is the trauma of living with every one of these microaggressions and thinking that you're too powerless, or you're not prepared enough, or all those things to even speak up, to say something, anything. And so when I look at those moments, I really feel like it doesn't even matter if what I said made sense at all. I mean, fuck you would not have been appropriate, but I could have said something else. And in the course of these meetings that we would have with community groups that would say, we want to argue for a civil rights case, but does that mean we have to talk about racism? And I remember in a room like this, actually bigger than this, there were like 300 people in the room, and this, retired, older Chinese gentleman who was from Hong Kong originally. He spoke English with an accent. He got up, and people were saying, should we even speak up? And he said, I'm retired now. I have trained every supervisor I have had. I've trained every one of them, fresh out of college, young white boys who didn't know anything. I trained them. They became my boss. And in the 40 years that I worked for that company, I was never, ever thought of being a supervisor. And he said, that hurt. And I never said anything. And it hurts me today. But now I have to speak up. And so that's the kind of thing that people absorb. And, it's part of the, the anti, anti-human being thing that happens. And, whether we call it the misnamed microaggression or whatever, it's also part of the systemic infrastructure in inequity. And the more every one of us, comes up with that thing to just say, I want to talk to you about that, or that really wasn't cool with me. I just want you to know that not everybody here agrees with what you just said, or that really wasn't funny, and I hope you're open to thinking about it, or so all of those things.
My version of that is I say, we're not doing that here.
Yeah.
That seems to have worked. It's a lot of experimenting, but that's the one that sticks with folks.
That's a good one.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things that I was thinking as you're speaking, Helen, is that 40 years ago you were mentioning you're about the age of some of our students here. And it was a scary time, right? And you were right there, this brutal murder happened. How did you find it in yourself, the bravery to speak up? Because I'm thinking about today. Like, what is it that will trigger us to actually take action? Because like whether it's subtly, like we're not doing that right now, or F you, whatever it may be, but how did you get involved in it? I think a lot of folks don't understand that you are very central to the movement. You're now the Vincent Chin executor, right? And you have been there before his mom passed away, all the way through. How did you get so brave?
Wow. I never thought of it as being brave. It was really the idea that I could help do something here. And if I don't, and if the person next to me doesn't, and the person next to them doesn't do anything, then nothing's going to happen. And so, it has to start from here. And I'll tell you, the moment that I actually did have to think, am I going to get involved? Am I not going to get involved? So I, as I said up there, that I had been laid off from work for almost 2 years, just like all the other people in the Midwest who had factory jobs and things like that associated with manufacturing. And so I had to figure out, what am I going to be doing? I have to pay my rent too. And I realized that I wanted to tell the stories of the people that I worked next to, their lives, what they were going through, and I never saw those stories anywhere. So I started out as a freelance journalist. I just thought, I got to find a way to tell these stories. I didn't have any internships. I didn't have any courses, in journalism in those days. And so I just got my first journalism job. I had done a lot of freelance things. And when I heard about what happened to Vincent Chin and his killers getting probation, I just thought, I got to do something about this, and maybe I can help write a story about it. Maybe that will help. And so I contacted the 2 names I saw in the newspaper. They were community leaders. I found out how to reach them. I called them. I said, how can I help? They said, come to a meeting. And so I went to the first meeting, and Lily Chin, Vincent's mother, who has become like Mamie Till, Emmett Till's mother, she was in the room sobbing. So we're having a meeting, and all you can hear are these gut-wrenching sobs through the whole meeting. So there's no question about who was Vincent's mother. And meanwhile, we're all talking about, what can we do? What can we do? Well, nowadays there are so many, there's a diversity of lawyers, but in those days, the legal profession had very few people of color, very few women, and so almost all of the Asian lawyers in Michigan were in that room, all 10 of them. That's how few, advocates there were. And one by one, they said, once a judge gives a sentence, you can't change it unless the judge changes it. And most judges, they have big egos. They're not going to admit that they were wrong. It's almost impossible to do. That's true today, too. And so one by one, all you could hear, they say, no, 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 you can't do anything. And all you could hear, finally, was just the sound of Vincent's mother sobbing. And I sat there, taking my notes, thinking that, and I remember thinking, is this how it's going to end? It didn't even start. The community's not even going to speak up. And so as a brand new journalist, my first job, thinking, okay, this could be the very end of my career, but I raised my hand and I said, and I didn't know anybody in the room at the time, I just said, you know, we might not be able to change the judge's mind, but we have to let everybody know that this is not okay with our communities. And so it was at that moment, Lily Chin, Vincent's mother, stopped crying. And she stood up and she said, we must let the American people know that this is not right. They killed my son like he was an animal. And, you know, and so this is not right. And it was that moment that the energy changed, and people, you know, with her moral authority as his mother saying, we must do something, then the energy shifted. And instead of people saying what we cannot do, we can't do this, we can't do that, they started saying, okay, what could we do? Even if we can't change the judge's mind, let's try. But even if we don't, we will do something. And I want to tell that story because it's not like I was so brave. It was all I did was raise my hand. And remember the thing I was just saying, having something, saying something, you know, and that's all I did. Every one of us has times like that where we have a choice. Do I speak up? Do I do something? Do I send an email? Do I post something on my social media just saying, I think this was wrong, or hey, we should all have a look at this. You know, what can we do? That was what I did. And I don't think it was so brave. It was really just, you know, realizing like, we can't let this stop here. If I can at least say something, who knows what'll happen. But yeah, that was where that moment happened, and I became involved.
And you've been involved for the last 40 years. You know, I mean, you know, one of the things is that there's so many folks who will get involved temporarily or situationally, but you've made this part of your life's work, and not just with Vincent Chin and Asian American or Wenho, LGBT communities, women's rights. I mean, you've been out there, you know, and walking the talk, right? Is that the proper saying? Yeah, walking the talk. So thank you for that.
So part of your fight has been the storytelling. A big part of it has been the storytelling. And when I was coming up as a student in undergrad and grad school, this book, Asian American Dreams, was an iconic book, a life-changing book for a lot of Asian American students, a lot of students of color who never knew that their histories or experiences counted as knowledge. And I'm wondering, this book was published in the year 2000, and I picked it up over these past couple weeks to refamiliarize myself, and I just thought, oh my gosh, everything I'm reading here that you wrote in the 1990s and the year 2000, it still applies today. So I was dying to ask you this question, which is, what's the same and what's different between the time you were writing this book and today?
Wow. So 1990s, so that means I was writing this more than 20 years ago. It came out 22 years ago. And it is really true. A lot of the, you know, things about stereotypes, you know, representation or lack of representation, voices, fighting for political recognition, all of those things, it's still happening, you know, and maybe things have inched forward a bit, or even, you know, at the time I wrote that book, there was no such thing as gay and lesbian marriage. At the time, I was with my now wife, but, you know, we've been together for more than 30 years, and never did it enter my mind that we would ever be able to get married, you know, so that happened after this book came out. It would have been, and actually I have a chapter in here about the fight for same-sex marriage, but it seemed like it was still so far away. So some things have changed. We had, you know, a Black American president. You know, that's like kind of incredible to think that that happened, and he hasn't gone away. And so, you know, but so speaking of micro and macro, the infrastructure. Some things in the infrastructure have changed, but pretty much it's the same systemic system that we have. What's changed is the people. The people have changed a lot. So, for example, when Vincent Chin was killed, or when I was writing this book, there were maybe 2 to 3 million Asians in America, Asian Pacific Islanders in America. And that includes, the Pacific Island territories and the state of Hawaii and California, where the majority of Asians in America are. That was, maybe like 1% of the American population, or 2% by the time this book came out. Now we're at 7%, 24 million, and still increasing, and that's huge. And so that's just speaking of Asian Americans. Then you look at other communities of color in this country, and the state of California, back when that book came out, had already passed that threshold of being, a majority minority population. There was already the majority of people in the state of California were people of color. What's changed is that America, the whole country, is going to pass that threshold, I think, within the next 10 years. People predict 2040. I think it will probably happen before then. But in any case, for those of you who are students, it's your lifetime. It's on your watch that this thing is going to happen. And so a lot's gone on within our communities. I mean, organizing, changing of laws around, immigration, fighting this fight of the border that has not ended and keeps being treated as a political football. But a lot of things, because the consciousness and population has changed, the voices have changed. We have Black Lives Matter movement. We have immigrant rights movements. We have Me Too movements. And I have to tell you, that reminds me a lot of the time when I was a teenager. When I was a teenager, and the civil rights movement, anti-war movements, women's liberation movements, gay rights movements, all of these things, the environmental movements were just starting. Well, obviously we didn't solve a lot, and some things have, have gotten worse, when we think about climate change and so forth. But that genie of the diversity of America is not going back into the bottle, no matter how many people want to make America white again. It's just that ship has sailed. And so the thing is, with the strength in numbers that we have, how do we fight this thing about that we can never come together? And things that happen, like in the news in LA and stuff like that, how do we work through those things so that our communities, all of our communities, and what we have in common with each other, to want to live in safety, have kids be able to go to school without fear that something horrible is going to happen at the school, or that our elders can go for a walk at night and, or in the morning and not be endangered. All of those things are things that everybody wants. And so, so that part, our numbers have changed incredibly. The consciousness has changed incredibly. And that's why I have to say why I think there is so much intensity of news and commentary all the time that says we're so divided we can never come together. Because what if we all came together? Just think what could change, how much positive change could happen. And so that's the part I think we all have to, organizing and what's involved in organizing has not changed. It's being able to connect with people beyond social media. There's nothing that takes the place of one-to-one saying to somebody, hey, did you see what happened? Not just reading about it, in Snapchat or on TikTok or seeing something, but this thing is going to happen. Are you going to be there? We need you there. Are you going to be there? And having somebody say yes or no to your face. And there's nothing that takes the place of that. And that's what organizing was back then, organizing way back before then, and organizing today. So that's the power we have today. We just have to use it.
I mean, one of the things I was going to ask you that you're starting to talk about is building a coalition. How do we create solidarity among all of our minoritized and oppressed communities? And I love that you say, imagine what could happen if we all came together. For a lot of us sitting here who may not be, like, I think there is a perception of what an activist is, right? Like somehow activists have to be on the street, activists have to be, protesting and be very vocal. Sometimes there's silent activism too, right? There are different forms. And I would imagine some of the folks, I want to do something, but I don't know where to start. I would love to organize, but I don't know what to do. I don't know which communities I should, like what kind, you've been talking at universities across the nation, you've been around the world, you've been talking about Vincent Chin, but you've also been talking about anti-oppression work, rights for women. What, if you were to take away from all of your experiences, and I know you may not have the concrete answer, but just maybe some advice from your observations and your experience, what would you recommend that we all start to think about? And then what would you recommend that we all start to take steps in doing to take action, to work on building a solidarity and coalition building?
Wow. That's the big question, right? And I want to say none of us should underestimate the forces of division, because that's been underway. People came together in the 1960s and the 1970s, and also it wasn't kumbaya. There was a lot of bad stuff that happened too, a lot of egos, a lot of turf, a lot of things like that. But overall, people came together to do a lot. And it was in that time that a lot of major think tanks were developed. Millions went into, like, how do we stop this? In fact, back then, we're in the Cal State system. It cost maybe a couple $100 a year to go to college. And when students, those were youth movements back then, there was a conscious recognition by Governor Ronald Reagan back then, who said, these are students, and they're protesting, and they're, stopping everything on college campuses. We're going to change that. And that's when tuitions started going out of sight and making it so much harder for regular people to get an education. So what I want to say is a lot of the division has been very conscious, calculated. The debates about affirmative action, all of those things that, around immigrant, just you name it. They have been experimenting with those things. What to call it? Civil Rights Initiative, which is about getting rid of, quote, undocumented people. And so this has been going on for quite some time. And unfortunately, a lot of people have absorbed those messages, like, you can't trust those people because of X, Y, and Z, or these people will never like us, we'll never like them, we'll never come together. I mean, we all hear about that in our communities. And so the thing is to know that that's what we're, tell me your question again. I'm sorry, I started going down a rabbit hole.
What should they do to take action?
Okay, so so whatever we do is a way to undermine that. I mean, so if we can connect with people, and I would just say, you don't have to have a master plan about, okay, we're going to do this to turn back climate change or, whatever the issue is. But what do you and your friend groups talk about? Is it a sorority? Is it a church group? Is it a, one of the centers on campus? What can we do to address? And then you all choose, have a meeting and make a list of, if we could do anything, what would we do? And that would help people on this campus and the community and whatever. What are those things? And then talk about what they are and begin to do something. And it doesn't have to be big things. I know I was at the University of Hawaii campus earlier this year. They did something like that, and they came up with doing something about the cash bail system and the thing about and how that falls on communities of color especially hard. and that they were going to go around, put flyers out, go to city hall meetings and stuff as a class project. And what happens in the course of that? You build bonds with each other. You learn things about how to make change. This worked, this didn't work so well. I enjoyed doing that. I really liked hanging out at the Safeway or the Vons and passing out flyers and talking to people. Well, that's great. If you like doing that, then finding ways to, you also find friends, and you find people who share your values and so forth. So I would say, it doesn't have to be big. They say, think globally, act locally. What does that mean? Act like, what is the local issue? It might be, holidays are going to be coming up at your family gathering. How do you talk about certain things with your family? It doesn't have to be pick a fight with, Uncle so-and-so. It can be like, let's talk about what's going on in the world today. What can we do as a family to reach out to people, get all registered to vote? Help Auntie so-and-so who has no way to get to the polls to vote if that's what she wants to do, all of those things. And it's not just individual. If you can find people who share the interests and values that you want to make change about, then you multiply it. That's when political movements happen. Because if everybody reaches 5 people or 10 people, you just think, then pretty soon it's thousands of people. And so that's how it all happens. And there's no mystery to it. It's just do something. Because doing nothing is actually doing something. Doing nothing is taking a stand to keep things the way they are. And so doing something, is the key.
I'm going to ask one more question, and then the audience, we're hoping that you could chime in with your questions. But to the topic of division in this country, one thing that really scares me is we're working with several different realities. So I'm very proud to say that at the Cal State system, every student is going to be required to take an ethnic studies course, which is amazing because we can learn about the contributions and the histories of folks of color, learn about colonialism and historical racism and systemic oppression. But there's other parts of the country where lawmakers are trying to get schools to erase history or to not allow young people to talk about their minoritized identities like being gay or trans. And so I'm wondering, for us Californians in the room that have the luxury of taking ethnic studies classes, living in a diverse state, how do we reckon with the fact that there's part of the country, maybe some of our family even lives there, where they're just functioning with a different reality of what America is?
Yeah, well, where we are today, yes, there's a lot of divisions, and I have to say, it's not the first time. I mean, so sometimes things get posed as though this is the worst that it's ever been, actually. I mean, when I was, in high school, I had to find a job in the summer to start thinking about raising money for college and stuff, and I had a job at a dry cleaners, and the press operator, who would do the ironing, she was like this tough, incredibly tough immigrant Italian woman. She always had a cigarette hanging out of her mouth. It was incredible that she wasn't like dropping holes onto the clothes that she was pressing. And Woodstock was happening. Okay, I know that is like super ancient history. But Woodstock was happening. What was that? A music festival. And she said, we should drop an atomic bomb on that. This has no place in America. Look at all their long hair, those hippies and blah, blah. And she could just go on and about it. And so that generation divide totally existed then. People were like, you were on this side or that side. And so we've had division before. So I just want to say that what we're going through today, we'll get through it, and we will overcome it if we all do something. And family situations, yeah, that's often the hardest thing. But it is the opportunity because that's an instant network that we have. Family that live maybe in one of those really divided areas. And And, you can't assume or even think that you might change somebody's mind, but you might open it a little bit. And I want to tell you, when I was in college, and I was a college activist, I was really into wanting to, learn as much as I can, invite speakers, have them come. And I had a very good friend, my best friend in college, who was also Chinese American. And I would tell her, come on, you got to come to this. This is happening. And one day she said to me, Helen, you care about that. I don't care about that. Don't tell me about that anymore. You're wasting your breath, And I was like, oh, And it kind of hurt my feelings because I wanted my best friend to be like me, or that we would be bonded with everything. But she, she drew her borders. And so I didn't bug her anymore about it, but we stayed friends. And then about 10 years later, 15 years later, her son, by then she was married, she had a kid, he was 10, he was beginning to go to, puberty, middle school, and she called me up and she said, my son is really having problems in school. He really just doesn't seem to have any self-esteem for himself. He's ashamed of being Asian. He's all that stuff. Can you suggest anything? Any, books that, he might read or that we could share? And I didn't say to her, you should have come to those meetings back then. But the thing I want to say about it is whatever you do, whatever conversations you have with people, she heard me, even though she didn't want to hear it. She heard me, and 10, 15 years later, she called, and she got, by then, very involved in community work and stuff like that, because she could see the impact on her own child. And so, so these conversations that you might have with people who are close to you, family members, who are in sororities that you might be part of, fraternities, church groups, whatever organizations that they might be, they're not falling on deaf ears. So you have to know that whatever you do makes a difference. If not today, it could, 5 years, 10 years. But so all of that, to not feel too defeated about it or despairing about it. Everything we do, it's like, you throw a pebble into the ocean. Okay, it's a little ripple. What is it going to do? Well, I'll tell you. If like thousands of people did the same thing at a certain moment, it would make a big difference. And so anyway, have those conversations, as hard as they might be.
They are, but yes, we should. And speaking of conversation, we want to loop in the audience to this conversation. So we would love to get questions. Is the mic floating around? Okay, Melissa is going to make her way over to you if you want to ask a question. So don't be shy, raise your hand. And kindly introduce yourself and what's your course of study so we can know who you are.
Hi, my name is Mariana. I'm currently taking a health psychology class. My question is, what are your thoughts on kind of the unsaid responsibility of minorities having to educate other people? Kind of justifying why our problems should be real and recognized.
Yeah, thank you for that question. It gets very tiring for people to feel like, I got to be the one who always is educating somebody, and why don't they just do a search and educate themselves? Mm-hmm. And, or at least make some effort. And both of those things are very valid. And if you have the energy to be able to educate other people for the 10 millionth time, for somebody to say, where are you really from? And I say New Jersey, and they, no, really, and I say, really, New Jersey, and you go through that again and again and again, and you just think, oh God, do I have to do this again? And that's where group action and mobilization and it helps, because right now, so the state of California has an ethnic studies requirement. New Jersey, Illinois, Connecticut and Rhode Island legislatures this year just passed a requirement for K through 12, kindergarten through, 12th grade, that there should be some kind of curriculum about Asian Americans, as well as other communities too. But so these efforts are going on, and that's what also has to happen. But I guess the main thing is to not feel like you have to go it alone, and why I stress organizing, whether it's dealing with, quote, microaggressions, or, and having to educate people is a form of microaggression too, right? So, but don't feel like you're alone. Reach out to other people, and sometimes it could be an ally who is the same as that person, the same background as that person, who says, oh, come on, George, why don't you look it up yourself? And so you don't have to say that, and so those are all things that, but if you have the stomach for it, yes. I feel like I do that. I mean, my responsibility as Lily Chin, Vincent's mother, naming me as the executor to her and her son's estate, is a certain responsibility I have. And I don't see it as a burden. I see it as a privilege for me to do, and if I can open up a few minds, okay. And the other thing is you have to take care of yourself too. I mean, if you feel like I just don't have the energy to do this, I have to, being an organizer, for example, or an activist, sometimes you are in final exams, or you have to finish this paper, or you're helping to take care of your parents or kids or things like that, or your job. You can't go 100 miles an hour all the time. And I couldn't either. I mean, it is a marathon and not a sprint. So there will be times where you want to say, okay, for my own mental health, my own well-being, I need to step back for a minute. I'll be back, but I'll step back now. And the good thing is I have around me other people who I can say, I have to step back for a minute, but can you guys take up some of what I'm doing? And when you need to step back sometime, I'll be there for you. And so that's the power of being, with other people and not being alone. And mental health-wise, being isolated is the worst thing.
Hi, my name is Lillian, and I'm also taking health psychology. My question, it's pretty much similar to her question, but during the politics, all that, which side are we on, that was one thing, and then it turned even uglier than that for my situation, because both my parents were immigrants from Mexico, and they've, became citizens now, but become them, and I went to the military, but my husband currently is, Caucasian, and his family is very anti-immigrant, and I hear what you're saying about finding that healthy line, and I'm outspoken a lot, and I'm really proud of where I came from, and I will forever be proud of that and tell everybody my story, or my parents' story. And I feel like my husband is very torn though in the middle, because he absolutely adores my parents. He loves where they came from. He's been to their hometowns, everything. And then we get around his side of the family, and it's like, I'm the only one. And I'm fighting for myself. I'm fighting for my parents' story. I'm fighting for, and it feels like I'm drowning. So most of the time I have no problem speaking my mind and standing, straight and tall. But I feel now lately it's been kind of going the opposite way, and it's probably due to mental health, being around that, because I'm outnumbered, and it's not fair for my husband to be caught in the middle between his family. So at home, I know where he stands. But in front of them, yeah, I get zero support. And last year, I said, I don't want to go around your family anymore, which I'm not that kind of person. I love being around families. So it was tough. And eventually, his brother and I agreed to disagree about literally everything, and we said we're not going to talk about politics, we're not going to talk about this, we're removing all that from the table. If you have something to say, then I'll step outside. You guys can have your conversation, but I'm no longer going to be part of this conversation. So the kind of neat thing is that my husband is definitely all for that too. Like, okay, I'm not going to change his mind, he's not going to change mine. And we just have learned to just kind of keep it civil.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. I think it's true. A lot of families, maybe most families, have things that you cannot talk about. And it sounds like yours has a lot you can't talk about. And for the sake of for your own health, you need to be able to draw some lines there. And hopefully, over time, like my friend, who years later were like, oh, okay, but just for you to know, just your even being there, sometimes just even being there is, number one, it's a statement, and it has the potential for making a difference just being there. So not for you to feel like you're not speaking your mind, but just the fact that you're there is a statement that may make a difference one day. So.
Can I add something to that? There's a book by, a graphic memoir actually by Mira Jacob, M-I-R-A, Jacob is the last name. Her story is very similar to yours about how there was a time when all the families got along, and then with everything happening in the world, there was a shift. And I share the graphic novel because she talks about how that affected her relationship. She's a woman of color, affected her relationship with her in-laws, but also it shaped how she had to raise her children as well. And I share the memoir thing because for me, sometimes when I'm going through things and I can't make sense of it, I turn to other people who have written about similar experiences, and even if they didn't resolve their version of the story, I feel less alone, and that could be a really big part of the healing from this.
We have time for one more question.
Oh, three more hands.
We'll do 3 more hands? Okay. I'll take all the questions. Helen said there's 3 more questions. That's
Okay, can you hear me? Okay. Hello, my name's Annette. I just want to say thank you for joining and coming here. This is actually my first hearing someone at a guest here, so super awesome. So I did have a question. But first to say I'm a sociology student here, taking a psych class with these fellow ladies as well. And I just wanted to ask if you ever at one point in your whole journey had anyone that was some sort of a mentor to you or really influenced you to be on this journey, long journey, if that makes sense. Did you have because I know you did mention you were a college activist. Did you have those professors there for you to support you, or even a family friend or anyone along the lines that helped you continue your journey and even still be here today to talk about it?
Well, thank you for that, and it's an honor to be here and for you to, your first in-person kind of thing like this. I, as a young student, would come to things and hear other speakers, and I would think, gee, how did they do that, and stuff. So back when I was a student, we didn't have the word mentor. At least I didn't know it. And I didn't know this concept of, that there are people who have, been on a journey before who I could go to and ask questions and things like that. But as I look back, there were definitely people who were pulling for me and helping me along the way. And I actually wish that I had recognized that at the time. So the very fact that you're asking that, that's really, important, because there are a lot of people that, they're willing to put a hand out, and you just have to know the hand is there, or to be able to ask a question and get their experience. I was very lucky that I had professors who were just so great and willing to write all kinds of recommendations for different things I was applying to. you know, over the years and things like that. When I wasn't sure, should I go this way or that way or whatever, they were there for me. And I have stayed in touch with some of them too. And so I guess that's what I would say. And, you know, and there are many incredible activists, you know, community activists who are there, who are doing way more than me, who throughout all their years continued fighting and, you know, and standing up for people and stuff. So they were all, I would say, mentors. And you know, when I was a kid, there were no Asian Americans on TV, in public sphere or whatever. And it was really seeing, you know, the leaders in the Black civil rights movement that, you know, that I thought, okay, I understand what they're saying and why they're speaking out. And, you know, and as I got older, I saw a lot more other different people, including Asian Americans, speaking up. And so whether it was my knowing them personally or not, or being able to see them doing things that then I could say, okay, they're doing that, that makes sense to me, I want to see how I can be part of that in some way too. So, so those are all things, and you know, good luck on your journey.
Melissa, can we get over here? Yes.
Do I have to stand up?
You can do whatever you want.
Okay. My name is Kiana. I'm a psych major, criminology minor, and I'm in the health psychology class with everyone else. I first wanted to ask, what part of New Jersey were you from? Because I'm from New Jersey. And second, I wanted to ask, like, how do you find your voice? Particularly because I feel like I deal with like a lot of microaggressions, and I want to say like F you, like how you say, and I want to snap, but I do a lot of perception management. I can't, you know. So I wanted to ask, like, how do you find your voice?
So what part of New Jersey are you from?
Camden.
Oh, wow. Okay. Well, okay, everybody who hasn't been to New Jersey. New Jersey is a tiny state, you know. But I was born in Newark and then ended up growing up very close to Camden in Burlington County. I went to high school in Willingboro. Do you know where Willingboro? Yeah. So cool. I mean, basically, we're like 20 minutes away from each other. And finding my voice when I was a little Asian kid growing up in New Jersey, when there were so few other Asian kids in New Jersey, I felt invisible and that I had no voice. And it really wasn't until and I was very shy and just really never, you know, never thought I could be up on a place like this talking to people. That would have freaked me out, even imagining that. And I think that it was those moments where I really felt like if I didn't say something, who was going to say something? And so feeling like I had to, because if I didn't, there would be nobody. And in those first few times where I actually did have to speak, like in public or whatever, I was terrified. It was awful, you know, but I survived. And I learned that I could do it, and okay, I survived. It wasn't so horrible that I was struck down by lightning right there. And so that gave me courage to say more, and just like one little step at a time. And that's why I say the thing around microaggressions, to feel like, you know, these things happen. They happen again and again, unfortunately. And so having something ahead of time that you might say, you know, that feels comfortable to say, is, you know, the way that you find that, okay, I said that, and it led to something, and the next time I could say something more. And so, you know, I guess I would just say that there's no flicking of a switch that suddenly you'll be able to say all kinds of stuff. That wasn't true for me. It's not true for me today. And but I can say a lot more today than I did, you know, when I was a student. And so just feel like you can say something. And when you say something, that'll make you, that will also, changing the world will change you and make you feel stronger. And that's what happened to me, and I know to a lot of other people. It's just that, like, just think of it as one step at a time, and then just keep going on that journey.
Okay, one last question.
Hi, my name is Caitlin. I'm also in health psychology. I wanted to ask about desensitization from like racism and stuff like that, considering like the increase of social media use, because it can be a tool for people to reach more of like a bigger audience, but constantly seeing like the news reports, whether they're accurate or not, or like seeing constant deaths with like similar stories to past ones. I've had people like tell me multiple times like, oh, well, this happened before, that's gonna be the same thing over and over, or that it's the same story, just a different person, or like if they're so far removed from it, like from a different state, they think it doesn't affect them. How would you still reach a larger group of people to educate them without feeding into the desensitization of like constantly showing them the same things?
Could you just repeat that very last part? And maybe speak a little more slowly on that, just the very last part you said.
How would you combat like spreading to a bigger audience without feeding into the desensitization of like spreading the same message of that this happens across multiple communities?
Yeah. So to the question of what has changed from back then, social media is a huge change. And we know that social media has positives to it, like you were saying, to reach out to more people. And it also has negative parts where people feel like you have to conform to a thing, or everybody's, you know, they have all that, like, what it called, shaming or things like that that happen. And feeling like you have to match what other people are doing. I mean, there's a lot of performative stuff, right, on social media too. And so I guess I don't know how I would be if I were, you know, growing up at a time when social media is so dominant. But I think as somebody who writes and has been doing media work for a long time, the one thing that is most important is to speak your truth. And so your truth, everybody else's stuff and the noise that is out there is irrelevant to your truth. I mean, it's good to know what people are saying. It's good to sort of think about how are people going to react to this, what's the best way for me to say this, but the core is your truth. And when each of us is speaking our own, this is what has happened in my community, in my family. This is what I'm experiencing. Nobody can debate that with you. These are your true experiences. So whether they like it or not, that's your reality. And then you can sort of drown out the noise. You know, if they don't like it, too bad. You know, it's true. And this is what's really happening to me. And yeah, I'd like to change that, or I'd like to do something about X, Y, and Z, and maybe that's why you would be posting it. But I think that's the key, you know, and that's whether it's social media or, you know, my ancient time days where you would write something in a magazine or make a flyer and pass it out, you know, or a newsletter kind of thing. It's like if you are speaking from a real place, talking about a real thing that's happening to real people, and here's something we can do about it, people see that and they respect that. They know that, yeah, and if it's a real truth happening to you, odds are other people can connect to that because it will connect to things that are happening to them. And so that's where the eyeballs come in. That's where other people see that. That's where that's where things that go viral. I mean, it's like, here's this real, you know, not a dog or cat trick, but something that, you know, touches people. And so I would say, you know, this thing about how many people view this and how many people can I reach and those things, those are guideposts and tools. The real thing is the what is the message? What is the real thing you want to say? And how is that really part of who you are? And that's what people will connect with. So anyway, everybody. Your questions are so great, and thank you so much.
You know, I don't know if you all know this, but today is National Coming Out Day. And the National Coming Out Day was based on feminist and queer movement, right? And it's really about making the personal political. And I really appreciate what Helen has been sharing is about telling your story, telling your truth. And activism can be from coming out, right? In terms of, if we kind of use the larger macro symbolism of Coming Out Day, for the queer communities, it was about coming out as gay as a political action. But for many of us who are anti-oppression, anti-racist, and we want to do this work, we can also come out through ourselves, right? That's something that we actually do have agency over. I want to thank all of you for being here, but really, can we please thank Helen Zia for joining us today? And I would like to invite all of you to come up front so we can get a group picture, if that's okay. I know half of the group already had to leave for class and other obligations, but if you would so humor me and come to the front. And then if there's someone who's dying to read Helen's book, Last Boat Out of Shanghai, which is very different from the work that she has done, but seriously, it could be a novel. I mean, it is a novel. It could be a movie. As I was reading it, I felt like, oh my gosh, these people came to life. So thank you so much for coming. Please come up. Helen will be here to answer any additional questions. And then let's take a picture.